I'm not the first person to say they hate Stuart Little, but I promise you I am the most authentic. For example, did you know that Stuart Little was born to human parents? Most of these guys don't. All this talking about Stuart Little being adopted proves that nobody else has done their research. They watched the movie, and that's it. But not me. I've fully immersed myself in Stuart Literature, and I'm telling you that these guys don't even scratch the surface. Maybe you've seen the movie and think, well, he's just an annoying little kid, and I can respect that. In the movie, he is an annoying little kid, but that's just how kids are. He's a child, and he knows it. But in the book, Stuart Little acts like a kid, but thinks he's an adult. And it is so much worse. Maybe you think I'm kidding when I say that I hate Stuart Little, like I'm playing it up for content, but that's just not true. I have an entire separate channel for ironic takes, so the fact that this video is a main channel video should tell you all you need to know about my honest feelings. Anyway, let's talk about biblically accurate Stuart Little. Stuart Little was born to human parents. Not adopted, born. In the original publication of the novel, Stuart Little was born, and everyone noticed how mouse-like he was. So no, Stuart Little did not come from an orphanage like the movie would have you believe. But obviously, nobody liked the horrific implications of Stuart Little crawling out of his mother's womb with his little rat tail flicking behind him, so later editions changed the wording. Stuart Little wasn't born, he arrived. But this sliver of censorship is not enough. Sure, it gives them a modicum of deniability, but they didn't bother changing anything else, including the following page, where they acknowledge that he was walking on 2 feet the day he was born, something they only could know if they were there when it happened. His parents are bewildered by his mouse-like appearance, but love him just the same. If he were adopted, they wouldn't spend months trying to recover from the shock and surprise of having a mouse in the family. So, is he a mouse? A small human? Some weird hybrid of the two? The narration is not at all clear about this, flip-flopping on whether Stuart is a mouse or merely mouse-like. Despite walking, talking, and dressing like a human, there's this implication that this is normal for mice. Before he was many days old, he was not only looking like a mouse, but acting like one too, wearing a gray hat and carrying a small cane. We never meet any of the other mice in this novel, so it's hard to draw a point of comparison. But Stuart seems to think he's a human, and everyone else treats him like a human, so that means we'll be holding him to human standards. None of this, he's just a mouse, he doesn't know better, bull that every Stuart defender famously says at every opportunity. And perhaps shockingly to you, Stuart Little being a freak of nature is the least of my concerns. As Mewtwo famously said,
"You can't control the circumstances of your birth. Therefore, we must judge Stuart Little for the sins he committed in life, and pass down his sentence accordingly."
For the first half of the book, Stuart is not actually that bad. He's a helpful little guy, fixing piano keys that get stuck, collecting ping pong balls that roll under the couch, and rescuing a ring that fell down the drain. He never complains, he just does what is expected of him. That's the kind of guy he is when he's home with his family. The moment he leaves, we see this whole other side of him, an arrogant young man who thinks the whole world revolves around him. He gets onto a bus, and when the driver comes around to collect the bus fare, he hands this guy counterfeit money. He's too small to carry actual coins, so he has these tiny little pieces of tin foil. The bus driver obviously can't accept his dimes, the money is just too small. And now that he's talking to him, the bus driver notes that Stuart is also quite small. Stuart becomes indignant. "I didn't come on this bus to be insulted." The bus driver seems like a nice guy, and probably would have let someone like Stuart, who cannot carry full-size money and also doesn't take up a full seat, ride for free if he asked. But instead, he's an adult, being asked to indulge in this childish game where Stuart pretends he's a paying customer. The bus takes Stuart to Central Park, where Stuart gets a job sailing a toy boat for a dentist named Dr. Paul Carey. This adult man has a heated, one-sided rivalry with a 12-year-old kid named Leroy, because this kid keeps beating him in boat races. Dr. Carey needs a 2-inch tall person to keep his boat's trajectory steady as it crosses the pond. So hiring Stuart is the only way he can beat that lazy boy who doesn't understand sailing. I'm sorry, but have you considered building a better ship? 5 minutes of being a sailor makes Stuart happier than he has ever been before in all his life, but his instincts are, frankly, terrible. He sails straight into a paper bag and then immediately fires his cannon, like it'll do something? It's all roleplay to him. He's taken on the role of an intrepid sailor. And you know, I don't think this is all that bad. He's a kid, right? He can have fun playing around with a sailboat, and if this were all he ever did, I wouldn't be making this video. But the way he treats that bus driver, and the attitude he displays on this ship, these are just the early examples of the awful behavior that lurks on the horizon. He may be a small guy, but the size of his ego is astronomical. And everything goes downhill when Stuart falls in love with a bird. Her name is Margalo. It's always a Margalo, isn't it? It's the name of someone who swoops into your life, saves you from a garbage boat, and quietly flies away without so much as a goodbye. It sucks because Stuart was at his best around Margalo. Let's put aside the fact that a human or a mouse falling in love with a bird is kinda weird. There's an invisible car in this book. It's not meant to be totally realistic. Stuart and Margalo were friends. They relied on each other. Stuart shot a cat in the ear to save her life in a moment of quiet, thankless heroism. But this was a mistake that would lead to Stuart's downfall. This cat, his name is Snowbell, and this is actually the second time he has caused problems for Stuart. The first time, Stuart was stuck in the window shade, and Snowball tricked Stuart's family into thinking that he'd gotten lost in a mouse hole. He was eventually freed, but he chose to say nothing about Snowball's part in the whole debacle. And now that Stuart has caught Snowball in the act trying to eat his friend, he fires a warning shot. Snowball scampers away, wounded, and Stuart keeps quiet. This is where he needed to say something. Snowball is a menace. He's never directly attacked Stuart, but we've seen how willing he is to let Stuart die. And now we see that his hostility extends to Margalo. This hostility directly results in Margalo leaving Stuart forever. See, Snowball wants Margalo gone, but he understands that it would be improper for one permanent guest to attack another. So instead of taking direct action, he conspires with a neighbor cat, who offers to sneak into the little home and eat Margalo when nobody is home to protect her. Margalo finds out about this plot. She's terrified, spends a whole day petrified not knowing what to do, and then leaves without saying a word. Stuart could have prevented this by saying anything about Snowball. Some pressure from the family could have stopped Snowblight from trying anything. Meanwhile, if Stuart had taken some credit for once and let everyone know that he had shot a cat to save his friend, Margalo would understand that she has allies that are willing to stand up against this strange cat that will come by night. Stuart never realizes it, but Margalo's departure really was his fault. Speaking up would have prevented it, but he'd rather bear everything in silence. He's playing his favorite role, the brave stoic, independent and unbothered. Perhaps the very definition of toxic masculinity. When he was on the brink of death, about to be dumped into the Atlantic Ocean, his first instinct was to bravely die like a man. But when he realizes he's alone and that he'll never see his family again, he finally lets his brave facade fade away, and he allows himself to cry. But Stuart Little is a creature of passion, and losing Margalo completely pushes him over the edge. Up until this point, chapter 10 of a 15-chapter book, Stuart really hasn't been all that bad. A bit annoying with the bus driver, sure. A bit too eager to please with that boat race, yeah. A bit short-sighted in not dealing with Snowball sooner, of course, but you can hardly blame him for that. Snowball never did attack Stuart directly, and I think it's reasonable for him to believe that one warning shot was enough to deter the cat's appetite indefinitely. But when Margalo leaves, Stuart loses all sense of reason. He falls into a deep depression, loses weight, and eventually decides to run away from home without telling anyone. It was bad when Margalo did it, but it's even worse when Stuart does it. Margalo was a guest, a wild bird who was never meant to stick around forever. Stuart is flesh and blood, part of the family. And from the perspective of the woman who birthed him, he's still just a kid, 7 years old and completely helpless. Once Stuart leaves, we never hear from his family again, but we can guess how they might react. All the way back in Chapter 5, when Stuart went missing, his family didn't take it well at all. They thought he'd gone down the mouse hole. The thought of Stuart being lost and alone terrified them, especially since he's such a small guy. The police department didn't take them seriously when they reported their mouse child missing, and they legitimately worried that Stuart might be dead. Sure, this incident was back when Stuart was 3 years old, and 7-year-old Stuart has been out and about on his own, but that doesn't mean Stuart is safe. It's only been a few weeks since the garbage boat incident, where 7-year-old Stuart went on a casual stroll and almost ended up at the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean. This world is dangerous for a little rat, so when Stuart disappears indefinitely, without leaving a note to explain himself, his family is going to have to assume the worst. This dude doesn't even bother sending a letter home when he has the chance to. He writes a letter to somebody else. Leaving home is the most selfish thing Stuart has ever done, and the worst part is that he's convinced himself that he's some kind of hero. He wants to find Margalo, and while he's at it, he might as well seek out his fortune. Nothing ever comes of this plotline. Margalo isn't in trouble. She's moved on. And while she and Stuart were pretty good friends, he's chasing a bird who left him behind. There's a metaphor here, a lesson about relationships. But Stuart never bothered to learn it, so why should I? Like, Margalo is a small bird. Stuart is a small guy. He doesn't know where he's going, and it's a big world. By the time this book ends, Stuart still hasn't found Margalo. He has no leads. By the tone of things, it seems like he's gonna keep on driving north, searching for this bird forever. What happens if Margalo does return to visit Stuart? He won't be home, and his family doesn't know how to get in touch with him. The movie actually fixed this in a huge way. Margalo, in the movie, leaves to follow her migration instincts, but Stuart recognizes that she'll be back again someday. Movie Stuart is an immature child, but he has more emotional growth in one scene than the real Stuart gets across his entire book. On the one hand, you could read Stuart Little as a coming-of-age story about leaving your comfort zone, but I hate how this rat goes about it. You don't just abandon the people who raised you. You don't spend the rest of your life chasing after some bird with nothing to go on outside of, she probably went north. Stuart is chasing a fantasy. He's projected all of his dreams of happiness on this girl he'll never see again. And maybe I could forgive all this, except for the fact that Stuart, like before, becomes a much worse person when he's out on his own. The first thing Stuart does on his way out of New York is commit a crime. He stops by a doll shop and decks himself out with a whole new wardrobe, paying for it all with a charge account. For those of you born in a year that starts with a 2, this is basically putting the expenses on his tab, promising he'll pay it later, either by mail or by swinging by the shop again when payday rolls around. But he's leaving town with no timetable for when he'll be back. They can't send him the bill, and he's certainly not going to stop by this store again. This is basically a dine and dash. Or, worse, watching a great video like this one and forgetting to subscribe. But Stuart doesn't care. I'm not even sure he thought that far ahead. Stuart's problem is that he is self-absorbed and legitimately thinks the world revolves around him. He's not just confident, he believes he's qualified to do pretty much anything. On the first day of his journey, Stuart drives past a superintendent who slumped over on the side of the road. This superintendent, he's dealing with an impossible situation. One of his teachers is out sick. And there's nobody in town who's smart enough to cover this class. There's simply nothing he can do about it. Clearly, he didn't have the foresight to have any substitute teachers lined up, and he certainly can't cover the class himself. What is he, a teacher? So he's just gonna sit here on the side of the road, praying for a solution to fall into his lap. And unfortunately, the devil listened. Stuart Little ends up with the job. That's right. You probably thought that a human family picking the rat at the orphanage was a big, egregious judgment call, but that's nothing. He's obviously sentient and deserves a family just like everyone else. But this superintendent looks at this 2-inch tall mouse and says, yeah, you know what? Maybe this guy should teach a full class of rowdy children for a day. And Stuart isn't even good at it. He walks into the classroom 15 minutes after all the students, lies about vitamins to make himself sound smart, and promptly decides to skip every single subject on the agenda. No math, no grammar, no social studies, no respect for the subplans. Instead, he decides they should have a nice class discussion. Not a bad idea, could empower the students a little bit. But then he immediately shoots down every suggestion from the students and settles on a topic of his own. The king of the world. The hypothetical person who should be in charge of everything. And Stuart, of course, sees himself as a good candidate for that role. After all, size has nothing to do with being a good leader. It's temperament and ability that count. Temperament? Stuart? The guy who got mad at a bus driver for not letting him commit fraud? Then again, maybe having a good temperament is not a requirement for world leaders anymore. Anyway, Stuart appoints himself as chairman. I swear he reminds me of someone. And the class talks about the laws that Stuart should pass. Then they roleplay a scenario where someone breaks a law by stealing a pillow. This really is all just roleplay to Stuart. And they force the thief to give the pillow back. With the roleplay over, Stuart gets a little weird about the pillow. It's a souvenir from this girl's time at camp, and it was given to her by a boy she really liked. But Stuart thinks it would make a great bed for himself. It smells nice. He offers to buy it from her. He fixates on it. And that's what Stuart is known for. Fixating on things he wants. He fixated on the boat he wanted to sail, and that got him a job. He fixated on Margalo, who he is currently pursuing. And now he really wants this pillow. Unfortunately, the girl who owns it doesn't want to give it up. It's too nostalgic for her. And she firmly turns Stuart down. Finally, after a dozen chapters, someone definitively tells Stuart no. Stuart sighs wistfully, like an old man with decades of heartbreak under his belt, and leaves them with one last line. Never forget your summer times, my dears. Class dismissed. Stuart gets into his tiny car and leaves. So this guy volunteers to fill in for a sick teacher, but he shows up 15 minutes later than the students do, skips the core subjects, and then dismisses the class after a 20-minute conversation about himself? Not only did he not teach anything, but he couldn't even be bothered to babysit for the full school day. When Miss Gunderson comes back tomorrow and finds out her class was led by a mouse who didn't even look at her lesson plans, she's gonna have a conniption. It's grossly irresponsible. Part of the substitute teacher's job is to be the adult in the room, making sure that these kids don't do anything stupid. You can't just leave them behind to run amok in the schoolhouse for the next 5 hours. At the bare minimum, you've got to be the adult. But that's the problem, isn't it? Stuart Little is not an adult. He's 7 years old. He treats this job like a side quest, and the moment he gets bored, he decides to get going on his way, throwing his responsibilities to the wayside. Just like he threw away his family to chase after the bird who left him. But all of this pales in comparison to Stuart Little's greatest fumble, a chapter so egregious and unforgivable that it inspired this entire video. A moment that proves without a shadow of a doubt that Stuart Little is irredeemable. The self-centered rat in his heart is dragged out to the surface, and we learn definitively that Stuart Little has negative riz. And no, I am not joking. Stuart Little hits the dating scene, and somehow becomes twice as insufferable as he was before. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me set the stage. Stuart stops in this lovely little town called Ames Crossing. He finds out about this girl, one Harriet Ames, who, for some serendipitous reason, is also 2 inches tall. When he hears about her, he's curious, but when he sees her for the first time, he is blown away. She is a gorgeous human woman, young, well-dressed, and the perfect height to be compatible with someone like Stuart. He has an opportunity to speak with her, but he's actually nervous. This is the first time we see him like this. He's been scared, he's been brave, but he's never been nervous about doing something before. So he doesn't actually talk to her. Instead, he decides to write her a letter. And I'm gonna read it out loud, in full. And you can tell me if you think Stuart Little has riz. My dear Miss Ames, I am a young person of modest proportion. By birth, I am a New Yorker, but at the moment I am traveling on business of a confidential nature. My travels have brought me to your village. Yesterday, the keeper of your local store, who has an honest face and an open manner, gave me a most favorable report of your character and appearance. Pray forgive me, Miss Ames, for presuming to strike up an acquaintance on so slender an excuse as our physical similarity. But of course, the fact is, as you yourself must know, there are very few people who are only 2 inches in height. I say 2 inches. Actually, I am somewhat taller than that. My only drawback is that I look something like a mouse. I am nicely proportioned, however. I'm also muscular beyond my years. Let me be perfectly blunt. My purpose in writing this brief note is to suggest that we meet. I realize that your parents may object to the suddenness and directness of my proposal, as well as to my somewhat mouse-like appearance, so I think probably it might be a good idea if you just didn't mention it to them. What they don't know won't hurt them. However, you probably understand more about dealing with your father and mother than I do, so I won't attempt to instruct you, but will leave everything to your good judgment. Being an outdoors person, I am camped by the river in an attractive spot at the foot of Tracy's Lane. Would you care to go for a paddle with me in my canoe? How about tomorrow afternoon, toward sundown, when the petty annoyances of the day are behind us and the river seems to flow more quietly in the long shadows of the willows? These tranquil spring evenings are designed by special architects for the enjoyment of boatmen. I love the water, dear Miss Ames, and my canoe is like an old and trusted friend. If you wish to accept my invitation, be at the river tomorrow at about 5 o'clock. I shall await your arrival with all the eagerness I can muster. And now I must close this offensive letter and catch up with my affairs. Yours truly, Stuart Little. Ladies, be honest. Stuart Little slides into your DMs with this wall of text. How do you respond? The canoe part was a lie, by the way. Or I guess he got so excited he forgot that he didn't have one. He has to buy a souvenir canoe from the same guy who lent him some stationery to write the letter. The boat costs 76 cents. And it isn't specified, but I think Stuart is still using his tiny fake money. The bus driver was the only person in the book to call him out on that. Maybe in this universe, where cats and birds can talk, the tiny fake money is legal currency? But what's stopping Stuart's dad from flooding the market with a bazillion tiny pieces of tinfoil that are now worth 10 cents a pop? Stuart prepares for his date with Harriet Ames. He's a bit disappointed that he has to use tiny ice cream spoons for paddles. He's weirdly fixated on how embarrassing it would be if he crossed paths with an indigenous person. Like they'd see him with his fake paddles and think that he's a sham? The canoe is also a bit drab and leaky, but he applies all the boating knowledge he's gained from working on the schooner to spruce the whole thing up, patching the leaks and balancing the canoe with some rocks. The next day, he has to take his car for an oil change. I know this doesn't have anything to do with his date, and it's really just a throwaway line, but imagine being a car mechanic and this 2-inch tall mouse pulls up in a gas-powered toy car. Would you even have the equipment to make it happen? But outside that one errand, he has nothing to do all day except dream about the date. He imagines how great it will be to finally meet Harriet, how impressed she'll be with his canoe skills. He's sweaty, he's nervous, he keeps checking his watch. I know at this point I should be used to it, but who's making functioning watches this small? Miraculously, Harriet Ames does show up. She's attractive, well-dressed, and most importantly, completely unbothered by Stuart's mouse-like appearance. She shows up with a box of peppermints. She wants to make this work. So when I tell you that Stuart Little fumbles the bag to a generational degree, I want you to understand that he has no excuses. Everything from here on out is all him. His deepest flaws are dredged to the surface, and Stuart reveals himself to be his own worst enemy. The date with Harriet Ames begins. He tries to put on an English accent to sound more refined. Already, he's playing a role. Harriet doesn't notice. Stuart comments that the weather could get bad, but Harriet doesn't mind. If it rains, it rains. Stuart tries to be a gentleman and help Harriet over the rough spots on the path, but Harriet doesn't need the help. Being 2 inches tall is enough on its own to keep a girl active. It's been an awkward start, but it's not over yet. They head upstream to where Stuart has parked his canoe, but the canoe is gone. Vanished. Stuart frantically searches for the canoe, and Harriet helps, but when they find the canoe, it's ruined. Some normal-sized kid found it, played with it, and turned Stuart's masterwork into a muddy mess. Stuart's response? Self-pity. Oh gee whiz. Well, the canoe has been destroyed. That's the whole plan for the evening gone, reduced to atoms. But actually, it's still not over yet. See, Harriet sees how frustrated Stuart is. and she suggests fixing the canoe together. But no, it would be no use. Stuart has committed to the dream version of this canoe date so hard that he can't conceive of any deviation from it. Don't mind the fact that Harriet is perfectly amiable and willing to help him fix the canoe. Honestly, it would be a really cute way to extend the date. But that can't work, since Stuart's vision for the date involved her being impressed with his boatmanship. I'm afraid a woman can't understand these things. Like, he's mad about the piece of string tied to the boat. He thinks it would look stupid, inauthentic, to have the string trailing behind the canoe as they paddle down the river, because Stuart Little is obsessed with appearing refined. Harriet suggests they just pretend that they're fishing. This should be perfect. Stuart has been pretending throughout the entire book, but he rejects the idea outright. The string, the mud on the canoe, it's all just too much. So the canoe date is over before it began. But Harriet hasn't played her last card yet. She offers Stuart a peppermint. He declines. She tries another angle. It's about to rain, so she invites him over to her family's house. They can have dinner, and afterward they can go dancing at the country club. This shows us two things about Harriet. First, it shows that Harriet's family isn't at all judgmental about Harriet going out with a strange mouse man, so Stuart was presumptuous to worry. Secondly, it shows that Harriet is flexible and willing to change her plans around to make things work. She wants this to work. She knows this might be her only chance at finding love, and she's going to give it her all. So, the only girl to ever show romantic interest in you invites you over for dinner and dancing. But small issue, you don't know how to dance. Do you A, accept the invitation to dinner but decline on the dancing? B, accept the invitation to dinner and ask her if she can teach you a few steps? C, accept the invitation to dinner and let the whiskey take over on the dance floor? Or D, reject the invitation to dinner on account of I don't know how to dance? The correct answer is probably B. But I can respect any answer that involves not ending the date immediately. Can you guess which one Stuart picked? Of course. No thank you. I don't know how to dance. Besides, I plan to make an early start in the morning. I'll probably be on the road at daybreak. Stuart has no schedule. He stayed here in Ames Crossing for a whole extra day and a half so he could meet Harriet. That's a time investment. And she's everything he could possibly want. Attractive, agreeable, 2 inches tall, won't fly away. But since his perfect vision of a first date didn't come true, he's given up on the whole operation. And even after all this, Harriet still throws him a line. Are you going to sleep out in all this rain? The subtext is obvious. We can fix you a bed at my place if you're willing to put in even the slightest effort to prolong this date. But no, he'd rather sleep under his canoe. Of course he'd rather sleep under his canoe, symbolically resting beneath his own broken dreams. And that is the penultimate chapter of the book, and the coalescence of everything I hate about Stuart Little. He is self-centered, bratty, obsessed with the superficial, stubborn to the point of inflexibility. He built his vision on a misogynistic assumption about a woman he'd never met, and when things didn't go exactly according to his fantasy, his world collapsed. But you know, there's one thing I can respect about Stuart Little. One character trait I can unironically admire. Stuart Little has the heart of a poet. I wouldn't say that he is a poet. We can tell from that awkward writing sample he sent to Harriet. But when he meets Margalo for the first time, she drops this accidental poem for him. I come from fields once tall with wheat, from pastures deep in fern and thistle. I come from vales of meadow sweet, and I love to whistle. Stuart immediately sees the beauty in these words and asks her to repeat herself, but she can't. She has a sore throat, and that moment quickly fades away into a summer memory. But those words stick with Stuart. In the final chapter, he asks a telephone repairman if he's seen Margalo. The repairman hasn't, but he writes down Stuart's description of her, and Stuart perfectly recites what she told him all those months ago. She comes from fields once tall with wheat, from pastures deep in fern and thistle. She comes from vales of meadow sweet, and she loves to whistle. The poetry stuck with him, and it's perhaps the main reason he continues traveling north. He sees the poetry in his quest, one small mouse looking for a lost bird. But the problem is that Stuart's idyllic view of the world is impossible and incompatible with reality. We saw what happened in Ames Crossing. It was a beautiful town that Stuart could have lived a fulfilling life in. except for the fact that he ruined it for himself the moment things didn't go his way. But even if the date had gone well, I don't think Stuart could allow himself to settle down. Settling down with Harriet would mean giving up on his journey to find Margalo, a journey he doesn't need to be on, but has committed himself to anyway. He would rather silently carry on this burden of finding this bird, because whatever he does, he has to feel like it's important. And it's kind of tragic because he could be important. His parents love him. He could have had something special with Harriet. He even got along with the kids he substituted, but by putting all of his eggs in the Margalo basket, he's leaving behind everything that matters in exchange for someone he'll likely never see again, chasing a summer memory. Stuart Little cannot see outside of himself. When he's speaking with that telephone repairman, the repairman tries to tell Stuart about some of his own adventures, but Stuart doesn't care. He's friendly and cordial to the people he meets, but he doesn't actually care about any of them. He's not going to listen to the stories of your adventures when he's busy trying to be the hero of his own. Earlier, Mewtwo said that we needed to punish Stuart Little for all his own crimes, but I don't think that's necessary. Stuart Little punishes himself. He's been poisoned by the Manosphere. He chooses to suffer silently, rejecting every chance at happiness. He's convinced himself that he needs to be at the center of the universe, but in doing so, he leaves the orbit of the people who cared about him the most. In a way, Stuart Little is the BoJack Horseman of children's literature. I hate him not because he's a bad person, or even because he's an uncanny hybrid humanoid. I hate him because he could be happy, but he chooses not to be. I hate Stuart Little, but I could never hate him as much as he hates himself.